March 5, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first American hunter-killer group prepared to sail into the Atlantic. Captain Giles Short, commanding officer of USS Bogue, reviewed the encrypted message from the 10th Fleet. Ultra-intelligence had decoded German naval transmissions revealing the position of multiple U-boat refueling rendezvous points. Milk cow submarines, U-459 and U-487 were scheduled to resupply wolfpacks operating along the convoy routes. The operations officer reached for the secure telephone. One escort carrier, supported by 4 destroyer escorts, would hunt the hunters. USS Bogue, USS Belknap, USS George E. Badger, USS Osmond Ingram, and USS Clemson. What none of them knew was that this single deployment would trigger the most catastrophic reversal in submarine warfare history. Within 8 months, American hunter-killer groups would destroy the myth of U-boat invincibility and force Admiral Karl Dönitz to withdraw his entire submarine fleet from the Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic had taught both sides that submarine warfare was not just about sinking ships, it was about tonnage calculations. Sink more tonnage than the enemy could build, and victory would follow. Lose submarines faster than they could be replaced, and defeat was inevitable. The German Kriegsmarine's U-boat arm had established dominance across the Atlantic shipping lanes. In March 1943, wolfpacks sank over 80 ships, totaling nearly 500,000 tons. In April, losses would surge to more than 600,000 tons, the peak of the U-boat offensive. The arithmetic seemed to favour Germany. 20 new U-boats entered service each month, while losses averaged fewer than 10. Admiral Karl Dönitz, Befehlshaber der Unterseeboote, commanded over 400 submarines from his headquarters in France. His wolfpack tactics had nearly severed the lifeline between America and Britain. Convoys SC-121 and HX-229 had been savaged. Winston Churchill would later write that the U-boat peril was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war. The USS Bogue displaced 9,800 tons and carried a complement of 890 men. Her flight deck stretched 495 feet, launching 12 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 9 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. But the carrier's greatest weapons were technologies the Germans didn't yet understand. Centimetre wavelength radar invisible to German detection equipment, high-frequency direction-finding gear that could triangulate U-boat radio transmissions with devastating accuracy, and carried in the bomb bays of her Avengers, a secret weapon designated Mark 24 mine to disguise its true nature, the Fido-acoustic homing torpedo. The hunter-killer concept represented a fundamental shift in anti-submarine warfare. Traditional convoy escorts could only react to attacks, forced to choose between pursuing submarines and protecting merchant ships. Hunter-killer groups had no such constraints. Their sole mission was to find and destroy U-boats wherever they operated. Lieutenant Commander Howard Avery would later command Composite Squadron 9 aboard Bogue. A veteran of Atlantic convoy operations, Avery understood that U-boats were most vulnerable during 3 critical periods: surfacing to charge batteries, meeting supply submarines for fuel and torpedoes, and transmitting radio reports to Dönitz's headquarters. German submarine doctrine required frequent radio communication, position reports every 24 hours, contact reports immediately upon sighting convoys, weather observations twice daily, damage assessments after attacks. Each transmission was a potential death sentence, revealing the submarine's location to Allied direction-finding stations. Aboard U-569, Kapitänleutnant Hans Johansson reviewed his patrol orders. 7 weeks at sea had depleted fuel reserves to critical levels. Radio instructions directed him to rendezvous with Milk Cow U-459 at coordinates 50 degrees 40 minutes north, 35 degrees 21 minutes west. Johansson had commanded the submarine since early 1943, taking over from Hans-Peter Hinch, who had led the boat through her earlier patrols. U-569 was a Type 66 submarine, the workhorse of the German fleet. Displacing 769 tons surfaced and 871 tons submerged, she carried 14 torpedoes and a crew of 44 men. Her 4 bow tubes and single stern tube had accounted for 1 merchant ship and damaged another during her career, a modest tally that reflected the increasingly dangerous Atlantic environment. But the submarine's greatest vulnerability remained unchanged since the Great War. Diesel engines required air for combustion. Electric batteries needed hours of surface charging. A Type 7C could remain submerged for 18 hours at economical speed, but high-speed evasion drained batteries in less than an hour. The American hunter-killer groups exploited these weaknesses with scientific precision. Search patterns calculated to maximize radar coverage. Aircraft patrol schedules timed to catch surfaced submarines. Attack protocols designed to maintain continuous pressure until batteries were exhausted. At 14:20 hours on May 22, 1943, Avenger pilot Lieutenant William Chamberlain detected a surfaced submarine on radar. Range 18 miles, bearing 090 degrees relative. He pushed the control stick forward and began his attack run. U-569 was running on the surface at 15 knots, her diesels charging depleted batteries after a night of evasion. The bridge watch spotted the approaching aircraft at 8 miles. Alarm bells rang throughout the boat as Johansen ordered an emergency dive. Crash dive procedures for a Type 6C required 35 seconds from alarm to periscope depth. Ballast tank vents opened, diesel engines stopped, electric motors engaged. The submarine's bow angled sharply downward as tons of seawater flooded the tanks. Lieutenant Chamberlain's depth charge pattern caught U-569 at shallow depth. 4 Mark 17 depth charges set for shallow detonation. The explosions damaged the submarine severely, forcing her back to the surface. A second Avenger, piloted by Howard Roberts, was already in position when the submarine reappeared. Roberts attacked immediately, but ceased fire when he observed white flags appearing on the submarine's periscope. The crew was surrendering. The Canadian destroyer HMCS Saint Laurent was vectored to the scene, but as she approached, Johansen ordered his crew to scuttle the boat and abandon ship. 25 of the 44 crew members survived to be pulled from the Atlantic. 19 men went down with their boat. The capture of survivors from U-569 provided Allied intelligence with valuable insights. During interrogation, German submariners expressed shock at the accuracy of American aircraft attacks. "They knew exactly where we were," one survivor stated. "It was as if they could see through the ocean itself." But ultra-intelligence had revealed more than individual submarine positions. Cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park had decoded the entire German naval grid system, identifying patrol areas, wolfpack assembly points, and supply rendezvous coordinates. Every U-boat at sea was potentially compromised. On June 5, 1943, USS Bogue's aircraft located U-217 charging batteries on the surface 450 miles west of the Azores. Kapitän Lieutenant Kurt Reichenbach-Klinker had commanded the submarine through 3 patrols, sinking 3 ships totaling 10,651 tons. Aircraft from Bogue attacked at dawn, catching U-217 in the vulnerable moments before diving. The first Avenger's depth charges damaged the submarine's diving mechanism. Unable to submerge, Reichenbach-Klinker ordered his gun crews to engage the attacking aircraft, while damage control teams worked desperately to repair the diving planes. The surface engagement lasted 18 minutes. U-217's 88mm deck gun and 20mm anti-aircraft weapons fired over 300 rounds. One Wildcat sustained minor damage from shell fragments, but the submarine was fighting a losing battle against aircraft specifically designed for anti-submarine warfare. An Avenger from Bogue's squadron delivered the killing blow with depth charges that bracketed the submarine perfectly. The explosions destroyed U-217's pressure hull in multiple locations. The submarine sank with all 50 hands, including Reichenbach Klinker. No survivors were recovered from the oil slick that marked her grave. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was immediate and devastating. Radio intercepts revealed growing anxiety among submarine commanders about American wonder weapons that seemed to find targets regardless of evasion tactics. Morale reports spoke of crews becoming increasingly reluctant to surface, even for essential battery charging. Admiral Dönitz responded to the mounting losses with tactical modifications. U-boats were ordered to transit the Bay of Biscay submerged regardless of battery depletion. Surface refueling was restricted to darkness. Radio transmissions were reduced to absolute minimums. But these measures only delayed the inevitable. The Americans had momentum and technological advantages that tactical changes could not overcome. By June 1943, 5 hunter-killer groups were operating in the Atlantic, each centered on an escort carrier with destroyer escort screens. USS Bogue, USS Card, USS Kor, USS Santee, and USS Croatan represented an industrial capacity that Germany could never match. USS Card, commanded by Captain Arnold Buster Isbell, would become one of the most successful hunter-killer groups of the war. Between July and October 1943, Card's group would account for 8 confirmed U-boat kills, earning the first Presidential Unit Citation awarded to a hunter-killer group. The techniques developed by Card's team became standard doctrine. Aircraft would patrol in expanding box patterns from the carrier's position. Surface radar contacts triggered immediate attacks. Submarines that crash-dived were marked with dye markers and pursued by destroyer escorts using Hedgehog mortars and depth charges. On August 7, 1943, Card's aircraft located Milk Cow U-117 refueling U-66 on the surface. The supply submarine was caught with fuel hoses still connected, making crash dive impossible. Lieutenant Charles Stapler's Avenger attacked immediately, dropping 4 depth charges that straddled U-117. The explosion of over 400 tons of diesel fuel created a pillar of fire visible from 30 miles away. U-66 managed to crash dive, but was damaged by the blast. She would survive this encounter only to meet her fate 9 months later in one of the war's most unusual battles. Kapitänleutnant Klaus Bargsten, commanding U-521, witnessed the destruction of U-117 from periscope depth. His war diary captured the shock felt by U-boat commanders. The Americans appear everywhere simultaneously. Their aircraft arrive without warning. Their weapons are impossibly accurate. We are no longer hunters, but the hunted. October 1943 marked a turning point that would define the remainder of the Atlantic War. The U-boat arm lost 23 submarines that month, including several veteran commanders who had survived since 1939. Each loss represented irreplaceable experience that training schools could not replicate. The destruction of Milk Cow submarines proved particularly catastrophic. U-488, U-489, and U-490 were all sunk within weeks of each other. Without refueling capability, Type 7C boats could no longer reach the American coast. Patrol areas contracted to the mid-Atlantic, where hunter-killer groups waited in growing numbers. USS Kor's hunter-killer group refined the doctrine of continuous air coverage, maintaining aircraft over suspected U-boat zones for days at a time, exhausting submarine batteries through relentless pursuit. This technique proved devastatingly effective against even experienced commanders. On October 13, 1943, Kor's group caught U-378 on the surface at dawn. The submarine's commander, Oberleutnant zur See Erich Maeder, had just celebrated his 26th birthday. His inexperience showed in his response to the attack, attempting to fight on the surface rather than crash diving immediately. 4 Wildcats strafed U-378, while 2 Avengers positioned for depth charge runs. The submarine's anti-aircraft gunners managed to damage 1 Wildcat before being swept from the conning tower by machine gun fire. Maeder ordered abandon ship as depth charges shattered the pressure hull. Only one survivor was pulled from the water. The brutality of these encounters shocked even experienced U-boat veterans. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Bleichroth, one of Germany's top aces with 24 ships sunk, barely survived an attack by USS Block Island's aircraft in October 1943. His submarine, U-109, limped back to port with extensive damage. Bleichroth never sailed again, telling fellow officers, "The Atlantic has become a slaughterhouse." November 1943 brought new American innovations that further tilted the balance. The introduction of the MAD, magnetic anomaly detector, allowed aircraft to detect submerged submarines at shallow depths. Sonobuoys dropped in patterns could track submarine movements for hours. The technological gap was becoming insurmountable. Kapitänleutnant Rolf Heinrich Hoppmann commanded U-405 through 7 successful war patrols. His experience and tactical skill had kept his crew alive through encounters that had destroyed lesser boats. He had developed techniques for evading aircraft, using cloud cover and rain squalls to mask his submarine's position. On October 31, 1943, U-405 was operating with Wolfpack Siegfried when USS Card's hunter-killer group arrived in the patrol area. The destroyer USS Bogue gained radar contact at 2100 hours, range 6,500 yards. What followed would become legendary in naval history. U-405 crash-dived but was forced back to the surface by depth charges. Unable to dive again due to damage, Hoppmann decided to fight on the surface with deck guns. In the darkness and heavy seas, the two vessels collided, Bogue's bow riding up onto U-405's foredeck. For several minutes, the ships were locked together. Crews fired machine guns, pistols, and threw hand grenades at point-blank range. American sailors hurled coffee mugs, shell casings, and in one case a sheath knife at German gunners. The surreal combat continued until the vessels separated. Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins, Bogue's captain, ordered all weapons to bear on the submarine. Over 4,000 rounds of ammunition were expended as U-405 attempted to escape. The submarine's conning tower was riddled with holes, her deck gun destroyed, and her hull punctured below the waterline. Hoppmann ordered abandon ship as U-405 settled by the stern. Only 8 of the 49 crew members survived the freezing Atlantic. Hoppmann was not among them. Bogue herself was mortally damaged in the encounter and would be scuttled the next day. The engagement demonstrated that even the most experienced U-boat commanders could no longer survive against determined hunter-killer attacks. The technological revolution enabling hunter-killer success extended beyond radar and homing torpedoes. Operations research scientists had developed optimal search patterns using probability theory. Acoustic analysis could distinguish individual submarine propeller signatures. Statistical models predicted U-boat behavior based on thousands of observations. High-frequency direction finding proved particularly devastating. German submarine doctrine required regular radio reports to coordinate wolfpack attacks. Each transmission lasted only seconds, but that was sufficient for Allied stations to triangulate positions within a 2-mile radius. U-boat commanders faced an impossible choice: maintain radio silence and lose tactical coordination, or transmit and reveal their position. The Germans believed their Enigma encryption system remained secure. They didn't know that captured codebooks from U-559 in October 1942 had allowed British cryptanalysts to break the 4-rotor M4 cipher. Every operational order from Dönitz to his submarines was being read by Allied intelligence within hours of transmission. December 1943 saw the destruction of several veteran U-boats that had survived since the war's early days. U-172, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Hermann Hoffmann, had sunk 26 ships totaling 151,000 tons. Her crew was considered elite, having developed innovative tactics for penetrating escort screens. On December 13th, USS Bogue's hunter-killer group intercepted U-172 in the mid-Atlantic. The submarine had just transmitted a weather report, her position betrayed by direction-finding stations in Bermuda and the Azores. The first attack came from Lieutenant Junior Grade William Fowler's Avenger, dropping a Fido homing torpedo that U-172's acoustic operator detected in time to evade. But evasion required high-speed maneuvering that drained batteries rapidly. Within 2 hours, 3 more aircraft had arrived to maintain contact. For the next 14 hours, U-172 played a desperate game of survival, surfacing briefly to ventilate the boat, then crash-diving when radar detected approaching aircraft. At 0800 hours on December 14th, batteries exhausted and compressed air reserves depleted, Hoffman had no choice but to surface and remain surfaced. U-172's anti-aircraft guns engaged the circling aircraft, while damage control teams attempted futile repairs. The surface battle lasted 43 minutes. Destroyer escorts USS George E. Badger, USS Clemson, USS DuPont, and USS Osmond Ingram converged on the submarine's position, firing over 400 rounds from their main batteries. U-172's hull was penetrated in 17 locations before she finally sank. 46 of her 57 crew members were lost. 13 survivors were pulled from the water. During interrogation, they revealed the depth of despair among U-boat crews. The ocean has become a trap. We cannot hide, we cannot run, we cannot fight effectively. Every patrol is expected to be our last. By early 1944, the transformation was complete. The U-boat force that had nearly starved Britain into submission was now being systematically destroyed. January saw 19 U-boats lost. February, 20 more. March, 23rd. The arithmetic of destruction was relentless and accelerating. Young, inexperienced commanders were being sent to sea with minimal training. Oberleutnant zur See Wolfgang Hader, commanding U-434, was 23 years old, with less than 6 months of submarine experience when Card's aircraft caught his boat on the surface in March 1944. He ordered his crew to fight rather than dive, a fatal decision that resulted in the loss of all hands. The quality gap between American and German forces widened with each engagement. American pilots accumulated hundreds of hours of anti-submarine patrol experience. Radar operators learned to distinguish submarine signatures from surface clutter at maximum range. Acoustic operators could identify individual U-boats by their distinctive propeller sounds, tracking specific boats across thousands of miles of ocean. German submarine crews, conversely, were becoming younger and less capable. The average age of U-boat commanders had dropped from 32 to 26. Veteran petty officers who formed the backbone of submarine operations were increasingly rare. Boats sailed with crews who had never experienced combat, led by officers who had graduated from abbreviated training programs. Admiral Dönitz's son, Peter, exemplified this tragic trend. The younger Dönitz served aboard U-954 as a watch officer. On May 19, 1943, the submarine was caught on the surface by British escorts and sunk with all hands. The loss of his son did not deter the admiral from sending other young men to similar fates, but it underscored the personal cost of the failing U-boat campaign. Spring 1944 brought new American innovations that made U-boat operations virtually suicidal. The introduction of centimetric radar on all hunter-killer aircraft eliminated the last sanctuary of darkness. Lee lights turned night into day, illuminating surfaced submarines from miles away. Even the most experienced commanders could no longer evade detection. On May 6, 1944, USS Buckley demonstrated the intensity of hunter-killer operations in one of the war's most bizarre encounters. The destroyer escort located U-66 on the surface west of the Cape Verde Islands. Oberleutnant zur See Gerhard Seehausen had commanded the submarine through 9 patrols, sinking 33 ships. His experience meant nothing against the forces arrayed against him. Unable to dive due to battery depletion, U-66 attempted to ram Buckley. The two vessels collided at 15 knots, their hulls grinding together in the darkness. German and American sailors exchanged small arms fire at point-blank range. The surreal combat included sailors throwing coffee mugs, shell casings, and hand grenades between the vessels. Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel's crew fired 105 3-inch shells, 2,700 rounds of 20mm ammunition, and 418 rounds of 40mm shells in 16 minutes. U-66's hull was perforated in dozens of locations. The submarine sank with 24 of her 48 crew members. The hand-to-hand combat represented the death throes of an era when submarines could operate as surface raiders. The capture of U-505 on June 4, 1944, by Captain Daniel Gallery's hunter-killer group from USS Guadalcanal, represented the ultimate demonstration of American dominance. The boarding party from destroyer escort USS Pillsbury descended through U-505's conning tower while the submarine was still underway, seawater flooding through damaged valves. They closed sea cocks, stopped the flooding, and saved the submarine from sinking. The intelligence value was enormous. Code books, cipher machines, acoustic torpedoes, and technical manuals fell into American hands. But the symbolic value was greater. U-boats were no longer fearsome predators, but prizes to be taken, their crews prisoners rather than warriors. The invasion of France in June 1944 brought hunter-killer groups into the Bay of Biscay, hunting U-boats attempting to attack invasion shipping. The confined waters became a killing ground. 15 U-boats were destroyed in the first week of June alone. Survivors described attacks by dozens of aircraft simultaneously, making escape impossible. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Werner, one of the few U-boat commanders to survive the war, described the experience of facing hunter-killer groups. We would detect aircraft on our radar, crash dive, and within minutes hear the splash of sonar buoys above us. Then the escorts would arrive, maintaining contact for days. We would surface, gasping for air, only to find aircraft already waiting. It was systematic extermination. By August 1944, Dönitz ordered the evacuation of French bases as Allied armies approached. U-boats attempting to reach Norwegian ports faced continuous attack from hunter-killer groups positioned along their route. Of 31 boats that attempted the passage, 11 were destroyed. The survivors arrived with extensive damage and exhausted crews. The introduction of the Schnorchel breathing tube allowed submarines to run diesels while submerged at periscope depth, but this innovation came too late and proved inadequate. Schnorchel-equipped boats were still vulnerable to radar detection and could only make 6 knots while using the device. It represented a defensive adaptation, not a return to offensive capability. September 1944 saw the deployment of the most advanced hunter-killer technologies yet. The Mark 24 Fido torpedo had been improved with greater range and sensitivity. New Hedgehog mortars could saturate an area with contact-fused projectiles. Radar could detect periscope-sized objects at 5 miles. The technological mismatch had become absolute. Fregattenkapitän Günther Kuhnke, commanding U-10, witnessed the destruction of 3 other submarines in his wolfpack during a single night in October 1944. His war diary recorded, "The enemy possesses capabilities we cannot counter. They strike without warning, with perfect accuracy. We are not fighting men anymore, but machines that never tire, never miss, never show mercy." The final months of 1944 saw U-boat losses reach unsustainable levels. November, 24 boats lost. December, 27 boats lost. New construction could not keep pace with destruction. Training facilities were bombed. Fuel supplies dwindled. The U-boat force was dying, and everyone knew it. Yet Dönitz continued to send boats to sea, driven by Hitler's demands and his own refusal to accept defeat. Young men who should have been in school were given command of submarines after hasty training. Entire crews sailed on their first and last patrol simultaneously. The hunter-killer groups had transformed the Atlantic from a battlefield into an execution ground. The story of U-396 exemplified this final phase. Her commander, Oberleutnant zur See Ernst Günther Unterhorst, was 22 years old. His entire crew averaged age 20. They sailed from Norway in November 1944 and were detected by USS Corps' hunter-killer group within 3 days. The pursuit lasted 18 hours. When U-396 finally surfaced, her batteries dead and air exhausted, she was immediately destroyed by waiting aircraft. There were no survivors. Winter 1944–45 brought the Schnorchel-equipped Type 21 submarines into service. These boats could sustain 16 knots submerged and possessed advanced sensors. But only 2 became operational before war's end. The hunter-killer groups had won the race against German technical innovation through sheer weight of numbers and systematic destruction of the existing U-boat force. The statistics told the complete story. In 1942, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied ships totaling 6.2 million tons. In 1944, they sank 132 ships totaling 773,000 tons. The hunter-killer groups had reduced German submarine effectiveness by 90%. At peak production, American shipyards launched over 140 Liberty ships per month, nearly 3 every 2 days, each carrying 10,000 tons of cargo. The tonnage war's arithmetic had become impossible for Germany. By March 1945, the U-boat force existed largely on paper. Of 463 boats nominally available, fewer than 60 were operational. Most remained in port, lacking fuel, torpedoes, or trained crews. Those that sailed faced certain destruction from hunter-killer groups that had perfected their craft through 2 years of continuous operations. The final humiliation came in April 1945, when U-546 attacked USS Frederick C. Davis, part of USS Bogue's screen. The destroyer escort sank, but within hours, U-546 was hunted down and destroyed by the remaining escorts. It was the last U-boat killed by Bogue's hunter-killer group, bringing her total to 13 submarines destroyed. Admiral Donitz's final war diary entry regarding submarine operations contained a bitter admission. The enemy's superiority at sea, particularly in the field of science and technology, has torn from our hands the most effective weapon we possessed. The submarine war has ended in defeat. The transformation had taken less than 2 years. In March 1943, U-boats had nearly severed the Atlantic lifeline, sinking ships faster than Allies could build them. By March 1945, the U-boat force was effectively extinct, its remnants cowering in ports or being methodically destroyed at sea. The hunter-killer groups had achieved this reversal through systematic application of superior technology, intelligence, and industrial capacity. They had transformed submarine hunting from an art requiring intuition and luck into a science demanding precision and persistence. Every aspect of anti-submarine warfare had been optimized through operational research and practical refinement. USS Bogue ended the war as the most successful hunter-killer group, with 13 confirmed U-boat kills. USS Card claimed 11. USS Corps destroyed 6. These escort carriers and their screens had sunk more submarines than traditional fleet units could have imagined possible. But their greatest achievement was not in numbers, but in methodology. They had demonstrated that modern warfare would belong to nations capable of integrating intelligence, technology, and industrial production into unified combat systems. Individual skill and courage, while still important, could not overcome systematic disadvantage. The romantic era of submarine warfare, where a skilled commander could overcome material odds through cunning and determination, had ended forever. The shock experienced by German U-boat captains was not merely tactical, but existential. They had entered the war as elite warriors, the grey wolves who would strangle Britain's maritime lifeline. They ended it as hunted animals, trapped between an ocean they could no longer hide in and a homeland they could barely reach. Korvettenkapitan Peter Creamer, one of only a handful of U-boat aces to survive the war, would later write, "We had no answer to the hunter-killer groups. They possessed every advantage. Radar we couldn't detect, weapons we couldn't evade, intelligence that revealed our every move, and most importantly, the ability to be everywhere at once. We went from predators to prey in what seemed like overnight." The human cost was staggering beyond comprehension. Of 40,000 German submariners who went to war, 30,000 never returned, a casualty rate of 75%. 784 of 1,162 commissioned U-boats were destroyed. The loss rate for boats on their first patrol exceeded 50% by war's end. Entire graduating classes from U-boat school were wiped out within months of completing training. American losses, by contrast, were minimal. The hunter-killer groups lost only one escort carrier in the Atlantic, USS Block Island, torpedoed in May 1944, and fewer than 10 destroyer escorts throughout the entire campaign. The exchange ratio that had once favoured U-boats by 10-1 had reversed to favour the Americans by 20-1. The tactical innovations developed by hunter-killer groups influenced naval warfare for decades. The integration of air and surface assets, the use of intelligence to direct operations, the application of operational research to optimize tactics, all became standard doctrine in modern navies. The Cold War's anti-submarine warfare relied heavily on lessons learned in the Atlantic. But perhaps the most profound impact was psychological. The U-boat force had represented German naval power and technological prowess. Its destruction by American hunter-killer groups demonstrated that industrial capacity and scientific advancement would determine future conflicts. The age of individual heroism had yielded to the era of systematic warfare. In May 1945, as Germany surrendered, the remaining U-boats received Dönitz's final order: surface, fly black flags, and proceed to Allied ports. Of the 49 boats that complied, many were commanded by officers younger than 25, their crews composed of teenagers who had never seen combat. They surrendered to hunter-killer groups that had been preparing to destroy them with the same methodical efficiency that had characterized the entire campaign. The last operational U-boat patrol ended on May 7, 1945, when U-320 was sunk by British escorts. Her commander, Oberleutnant Zursee Helmut Emmerich, was 24 years old. He and his entire crew of 36 men represented the final casualties of a force that had once threatened to change the war's outcome. Post-war analysis revealed the elegant efficiency of hunter-killer operations. Search patterns had been optimized using probability theory. Weapon delivery was calculated to maximize kill probability while minimizing ammunition expenditure. Communication intercepts were correlated with operational patterns to predict U-boat behavior. Every element had been refined through rigorous analysis and practical application. The greatest shock for German U-boat captains was not the loss of tactical superiority, but the speed and completeness of its occurrence. In March 1943, wolfpacks had nearly severed Atlantic supply lines. By November 1943, U-boats were being hunted to extinction, their bases under constant surveillance, their communications compromised, their every movement predicted and countered. This reversal occurred not through any single technological breakthrough, but through the systematic integration of multiple advantages: radar that could detect submarines day or night, aircraft that could patrol for hours hundreds of miles from base, weapons that could find targets regardless of evasion attempts, intelligence that revealed enemy intentions before they were executed, industrial capacity that could replace losses faster than the enemy could inflict them. The hunter-killer groups had written the first chapter of modern naval warfare, where victory was determined not by individual courage or skill, but by systematic superiority across multiple domains. They had transformed the Atlantic from a vast hiding place into a transparent battlefield, where every movement was observed, every transmission intercepted, and every mistake punished with destruction. Admiral Dönitz would spend 10 years in Spandau prison as a war criminal, contemplating the destruction of the force he had built and led. His post-war memoirs contained a telling passage. "I had believed that courage and determination could overcome material disadvantage. The American hunter-killer groups taught me that in modern war, technology and industrial capacity are decisive. We were not defeated by better sailors, but by better systems." The legacy of the hunter-killer groups extends beyond their wartime achievements. They demonstrated that future naval warfare would be determined by the integration of air and surface forces, the fusion of intelligence with operations, and the application of scientific methodology to tactical problems. The nuclear submarines of the Cold War, equipped with sophisticated sensors and weapons, were direct descendants of the concepts proven by escort carriers and destroyer escorts in the Atlantic. In the cold depths of the Atlantic Ocean, over 500 German submarines rest on the ocean floor, their steel hulls slowly dissolving into the abyss. They are monuments to the devastating effectiveness of American hunter-killer groups, who transformed submarine hunting from a desperate defensive measure into an offensive campaign of systematic destruction. The young men who commanded these doomed vessels had entered service believing they were joining an elite force that would determine the war's outcome. They discovered instead that they were facing an enemy who had transformed warfare itself, replacing the art of combat with the science of destruction. Their shock at this transformation echoed through the ranks of the U-boat force and ultimately through naval history itself. The German U-boat force had entered 1943 as masters of the Atlantic, their wolfpacks savaging convoys with near impunity. They ended it as hunted fugitives, their bases bombed, their supply lines severed, their experienced crews dead, and their remaining boats cowering in ports or fleeing from relentless pursuit. The shock of this reversal would resonate through naval history as the moment when technology, intelligence, and industrial capacity forever changed the nature of warfare at sea. The American hunter-killer groups of 1943 to 45 had shocked German U-boat captains not through superior seamanship or courage, qualities both sides possessed in abundance, but through the systematic application of overwhelming technological and industrial superiority that transformed the ocean from a sanctuary into a killing field where precision, not valor, determined survival. The final statistics were irrefutable. The hunter-killer groups and their allied counterparts had sunk 784 German U-boats. They had killed 30,000 German submariners while losing fewer than 5,000 of their own men. They had reduced the U-boat threat from near victory to complete defeat in less than 2 years. It was not merely a military victory, but a demonstration that the nature of warfare itself had fundamentally changed. The era of the lone wolf submarine, operating independently through stealth and cunning, had ended. The future belonged to integrated naval forces employing sophisticated sensors, weapons, and intelligence in coordinated operations. The hunter-killer groups had not just won the Battle of the Atlantic, they had revolutionized naval warfare and shocked their enemies with the completeness of their transformation from hunted to hunter.